Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at the new Psychic deck and the new skill Ready Shine. Now this deck might look a little bit strange at first glance, and that's because this isn't the traditional build that most people are running. You might have noticed that we have maxed out on our Siesta Toreros, and we do have Seraph of Darkness in here also. This is because this isn't necessarily supposed to be the most competitive Psychic list. This is instead a bit more of a different list that does try to play to the strength of Can Melody. But let's get into the skill first off. So Ready Shine is a pretty interesting skill. So this skill can be used if all of the monsters with 1400 or more attack in your deck are Psychic type. From turn 2 onwards, we can choose one face-up Psychic type monster on a field and it becomes level 5 into the end of the turn. So most of the time that's what this skill is. We can make a monster level 5. It's like, why would we want a monster to be level 5? Well, that's because of Can Melody, but we'll go back to that in a minute. If that monster was Can D, so everyone knows Can D, little 100 attack, 100 defense, level 1 Psychic monster, we can also choose a level 7 light attribute Psychic monster or a Jump up from our deck and add it to our hand. So that means if we find a Can D, we basically have access to a boss monster as a free +1, which is pretty cool. Or if we already have boss monsters, we can grab Jump up from our deck, which is also pretty cool. The Jump up specifically, we can send a face-up Psychic monster from our field to the graveyard, so most of the time that's going to be the Candy that we know we already have. Special summon a level 7 Psychic monster from our hand face up to the field. If you sent Candy to the graveyard to meet the requirement, the monster special summoned by this effect gains 1500 attack. So the logic is that Jump up basically acts as the other body to be tributed. So Jump up plus Candy means we do get out a boss monster from our hand, and that boss monster does gain 1500 attack, which is pretty cool. Now, we can only search light monsters, which means from this deck specifically in this build, the only card we can search is going to be Prima-Gitana the Shining Superstar, because again, the skill has to search light level 7 monsters, and Can Melody is a dark monster. But why do we want to make our monsters level 5? That's because of Can Melody's special effect. So return one other face-up level 5 or higher monster from your field to the hand, choose one face-down card on your opponent's field, and shuffle it into the deck. If your life points are lower than your opponent's, you can then add one level 1 Psychic type normal monster from our graveyard to our hand. And the only card that we have that's a level 1 Psychic normal monster in the deck is the Can D, so we can take that back from our graveyard and pop it into our hand. So what does this mean? If we already have a Can Melody in our hand, for example, we can summon out the Can D, then use our skill and grab either a Prima-Gitana or a Jump up, which is already pretty cool. Then, if we're able to summon out our Can Melody without using our Candy, we can then use the effect of Can Melody to put Candy back into our hand and then put one of our opponent's face-down cards back into their deck. And then if we then have another Candy in our graveyard, we can then add that back to our hand, which is a really cool combo. Effectively, that acts as a +2 for us, and we -1 card from our opponent. So, the reason we're playing 3 Can Melody instead of the 2 that typically everyone else is running is because, again, we're playing the Seraph of Darkness and the Siesta Torero. Both of these cards can flip our opponent's monsters face down, which means we can then shuffle those back into our opponent's deck, which means Psychic now has a reasonably good way to beat Set 3 Pass. Now, the only real issue with that is Can Melody can hit any face-down card, so it can hit face-down monsters or face-down back row. And a lot of the time you're going to want to be hitting this back row because those problematic trap cards, such as Buffered Slime, can really get in the way of us actually winning the game. But if we do want to hit those monsters, we do have a chance to just get through and attack our opponent directly with one of our attacks, which can be really good. But going through the card by card, we've already talked a lot about Melody, but then we have Prima-Gitana, and this is kind of the teeth of the deck. Obviously only 2200 attack, it does kind of suck. 0 defense also really sucks. That does mean we are wide open to getting flipped face down and pierced over, or getting sword and shielded. But at the cost of 1000 life points, we can boost the attack of all of our monsters. So this is really how we try to close out games. And like we said before, using our skill, we can use Candy to search it from our deck, which is really good. Next up, Roman Pick, still locked to 1 copy, but if our life points are lower than our opponents, we can pay 500 life points to send the top 3 cards of our deck to the graveyard. If a Psychic type monster is among the cards sent, we can add 1 Psychic monster from the graveyard to our hand. So this is fantastic. If we're able to take back a Can D, effectively we can do our whole little combo and get that extra plus. We can get the plus from our skill, and then if we have the Can Melody as well, we can get the plus from Can Melody, which is very, very good. Alternatively, we could just use it to take back a boss monster, which is also pretty cool. Next up, we have the brand new Rhythmical Performer. This is a pretty cool card. So we can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard. Your opponent sends the top card of their deck to the graveyard. Then if they send a spell trap to the graveyard by this effect, we can draw 1 card. So this is actually fantastic. Worst case scenario, we each mill a card, which is fine. Typically, we want to get cards into the graveyard anyway. Ideally, we want to get a Candy into the graveyard. We're going to want cards in there to use something like Talismanic Seal Array. There are reasons to get cards into the graveyard, but if we do happen to mill a spell trap from our opponent, we do get a free +1, and plussing in Rush is so important. Getting extra bodies to tribute, getting access to more spell and traps to set, always really powerful. So Rhythmical Performer, really good card. Then we have Siesta Torero. This is one of the best ways to get cards from our graveyard back into our deck, just so that we're not going to mill ourselves out. But this is one of the two primary ways we have to flip down our opponent's monsters so that we can put them back into the deck using Melody. So Siesta Torero, really good card. And then we have the suspect inclusion of Seraph of Darkness. So we have a face-up level 5 or higher dark attribute monster on our field. We can pay 500 life points. Change one face-up level 8 or lower monster on your opponent's field to face-up attack position or face-down defense position. So we can't change face-down defense to face-up attack to have another way to get to our opponent's life points. But what we can do is change our opponent's attack position monsters to face-down defense and then once again get rid of them with Melody. Notably as well, to use this effect, we do pay 500 life points, which can turn on specific effects such as Roman Pick. But using our skill as well, we can also make any of our dark monsters, so notably Speedy Performer, or our Silent Assailant up to level 5, which will then trigger Seraph of Darkness's effect. So we do have multiple ways to get this effect online. And worst case scenario, if the monsters have low enough defense, we can just attack over them with the Seraph of Darkness itself and potentially even the Silent Assailant. Next up, Speedy Performer. So if our opponent has a monster on the field, we can send the top card of the deck to the graveyard. One face monster on our field gains 400 attack. It's pretty short, pretty sweet. It's nice to be able to break locks. If we do summon just a 2400 attack can Melody, we do need a way to help it attack over 25s, and Speedy Performer is that way. We can also, again, use the Speedy Performer, use the skill to boost up to level 5, then put it back into our hand with can Melody, and then summon it out again and use its effect all over again. So there is ways to reuse this card, so all around, really good. We've already talked about Candy quite a lot, but this does work really well again with the jam up. We do want to use it with our skill to get all those pluses. It's basically just a really important integral combo piece of the deck. Then we have the Silent Assailant. Again, it's just a beta and it is a dark, so again, it does work with Seraph of Darkness and our skill. For our spells, first up, we're on Tribute to the Doomed. So this deck is still going to struggle to beat maximum monsters. So Tribute to the Doomed is in here basically to give us a way to beat maximum monsters. On top of the fact, again, we can use this to pop an opponent's face down card, which will let us attack in and try and get that damage where we want it. Then we're on the Jamp Up. These again are searchable and they're obviously really strong cards. You can kind of think of these like extra copies of normal summons because we can kind of use them like normal summons. We can set them on a previous turn, flip them up, get rid of one of our cards and get out a boss monster for a discount, basically one tribute cheaper. So it's kind of like that and also has the boost attached to it. We have Talismanic Seal Array. Again, we are still worried about maximums. I'm not really sure how we beat maximums if we don't have Talismanic Seal Array and we don't have Tribute to the Doomed, so it's very important for that. Then we have our back row hate in Jampy Check, and this is a really strong back row removal. If we have 2 or more face-up psychic monsters on our field, including a normal monster, and this is part of the effect that I often actually forget, is you do need to have a normal monster on the field to use and resolve this effect. We can look at 2 face-down spell traps on our opponent's field and destroy one of them. Then if you have Candy face-up on your field, you can gain 1000 life points. So that 1000 life points does oftentimes matter. Sometimes it will let you get an activation of Prima Gitana off, which is really good. The only time Jamp Check has ever really let us down is there was one game where our opponent set 2 cards and then passed the turn, went back to us, we used Jamp Check, we looked at them, and it was both Slime and Negate Attack. And we were like, so we have lethal, but we can't pop both of these. We have to leave one of them up, which really sucks. So Jamp Check, other than like that exact situation, is just absolutely fantastic. For our traps, we're on Buffered Slime and then Widespread Ruin because we're using the 2 copies of Jamp Check, which are limit 2, which means we cannot use the Negate Attack. But Widespread Ruin, in some ways, is better in a very aggressive deck anyway, because this is an awkward way that we can get more damage in. If we pop one of our opponent's monsters, then they only have 2 monsters going into our turn, so hopefully we can slap over them and then get in for some big damage. The only negative, Widespread Ruin does not work on maximum monsters, which is a bit disappointing, but it is what it is. So this deck is very fun. We've had a lot of success. We did have a lot of bricks with this deck. We will say that. This deck was almost a little bit prone to bricking, which I feel like it really shouldn't be. Between the copies of Jamp Up, between Roman Pit now to get us back an extra body, and only running 5 bosses, I feel like this deck shouldn't brick any harder than any other deck. But in some of the games that we were playing, we really felt like we were playing Blue Eyes White Dragon or something. We just kept feeling like we just kept opening 2 or 3 of our boss monsters. But I don't think that's a knock against the deck. I think that is just us getting a little bit unlucky. When the deck did behave, it was actually quite strong. Being able to flip our opponent's monsters face down did come up quite a lot. Being able to put them back into the deck with Can Melody, again, did come up quite a lot. There were some situations where, again, we couldn't quite get everything we needed. Sometimes if we just get out a Can Melody and we don't, for example, have access to a Speedy Reformer, or we don't have access to the Jump Up, Can Melody is still only a 2400 attack monster, and that can be a little bit lackluster. I would say that this deck and Psychic overall does tend to come down to, do you find your candies? If you find candy, basically you feel like you're off to the races. If we don't find candy, it can feel like it's a little bit of a bricky mess sometimes, and you never really get going. But overall, the deck is still very, very fun. It's still very, I don't want to say it's like very strong, and I don't even think this is the strongest version of Psychic. We will be covering that list a little bit later, but this is the list that we've had the most practice on, so this is the list we're talking about today. But this deck is still good enough to play with the big boys. It's just, again, going to be in that spot that Psychic's always been in, where it's not quite able to consistently beat them, but is getting there. I think all the new tools that Psychic have received is really pushing them in the right direction, and I think a more competitive build of this deck, again, without the Seraph of Darkness, could actually be a meta contender. But let's fire into the replays so I can show you what I've been talking about.
シュデュエル。シュデュエル。ラッシュデュエル。